2. The man they had captured the night before would not talk. Swear, in Catalonian, yes. But when interrogated by Major Sharp and Captain Frederickson, there was no response. The only thing they could establish was that Bartholomew Tyler was trying to flee the captivity of unknown soldiers. He was British, despite his response in Catalonian, and wore the same uniform as the soldier who had been hanged for murder the previous day. "Getting anywhere with him, Major Sharp?" asked the captain, looking in the direction of the tree to which a bent-headed prisoner leaned. Sharp followed his line of sight. "Closed up tight, like an oyster, more like," replied Sharp, scornfully. "But he understands, all right. He'll talk, eventually." He lolled back to Frederickson. "Wellington says anything which upsets the native population gives them more reason to turn on us." "Excuse me, sir." Tom's voice was quiet, but clear, as he interrupted the debate between the two officers. "What is it?" snapped Sharp, glaring at him. "Harris?" He looked at his rifleman, who was at Wright's shoulder. Tom glanced at Matt Harris, who he had asked to come with him. "If you please, sir," Tom began, looking at Major Sharp, and then at his captain. "I found Private Wright last night, disturbed by the intruders, sir," broke in Harris. "He heard something that the prisoner said. He told me, and I think you should hear them, sir." "Out with it, then, Wright," snapped Sharp, brusquely. "I heard voices, sir," began Tom, willing away the real reason he had risen. "Spanish. French. I heard shots." He looked at Frederickson. "Go on, Private Wright," he said, encouragingly, "tell the Major. You have nothing to fear." Tom looked at Sharp again. "The man you hold," he ran out between the trees. He shouted, "Damned you goes to hell." That was in English. "Anything else?" Sharp asked. Tom noticed that the Major's face was paling and wondered what part of what he had told him had caused this. "No, sir." "Dismissed, Private." Sharp turned to Frederickson when he and Harris had left. "So, I take it that this Ducos means something to you." "Indeed, Frederickson, indeed." He began to stride around the officer's tent. "That man, that Frenchman, Major Ducos, that worm, that spy ... Ugh!" He spat his exclamation as he paced back. "I should have known Ducos was behind this." Then, in a lower tone, spoke clearly, and coldly, "He has no honor, that man. He steals from the emperor he purports to serve. He pays rebellions for political purposes. He must know we are heading north. But what I don't understand," he broke off, striding over to the tent, "was how it was he managed to ambush a small group of a regiment without word getting to us. All of Wellington's men are stationed northwest of us. We are the closest to Catalonia." "Deserters, sir?" suggested Frederickson, thoughtfully. "Aye, maybe. But not many deserters have identical uniforms. This," he pulled over from his temporary desk, "made of crates and their regiment's second-best flag. This is regular issue British Army, highest quality Spanish wool broadcloth, dyed with the best cochineal, fixed with that dreaded mixture, argol, alum, tin compound, and oisin." Yes. Frederickson knew there was something more. If this were true, then the deserters were officers. Something of that nature we would certainly have heard of by now. No private's uniform is this light. No private's uniform is thus dyed. Rose madder is used, which, as you know, Frederickson, is not the best quality dye. Many a red-coated private, should he be lucky enough to last long, would have a uniform that is not red, but pink. Rose madder does not take the fixatives well. Plus, in this heat, this sun, it bleaches the cloth. No, these are no private's coats, he concluded, casting it down onto the floor. They've been given to 'em, these Catalonian rebels. And I reckon I know who. Do you wish to compare the coats, sir? For your report? I know that Wright, who spoke to you just now, is in possession of a red coat issued 6 years ago when he arrived in Oporto. The men needle him about it sometimes. Sharp looked with interest to Frederickson. Yes, Frederickson. A comparison would indeed be mighty useful. One red coat later, borrowed from a startled Tom Wright, who was alarmed to have been called back so suddenly to the presence of Major Sharp, having not long left it. Indeed, nodded William Frederickson, straining in the afternoon sunlight with his only eye. This is not like that. One can only conclude what purports to be a private coat is actually one designed for an officer. Sharp threw both jackets down onto the floor in disgust and awe at the cunning he suspected, and spoke it aloud. So, Duco's got hold of some redcoats, knew no difference in the style, bribed men like that, and that poor beggar yesterday to raid the Spanish. The look of it is that rogue British soldiers have been murdering, raping, burning. He shook his head at the deception. Clever. And him? Asked Frederickson. To be hanged like his fellow? A flogging might help, or it might make him more determined. But Frederickson did not hear the end of the sentence. Sharp instead handed Wright's jacket back to the captain and stalked away to the mess. 88,888,888. The pain which had awoken Tom the previous night coursed through his legs and his back. That pain, he thought bitterly, and the intermittent bleeding from it. It had begun, he remembered vividly, after the Battle of Talavera. He had just been out of range from a musket bullet from a French line but had fallen heavily. At Salamanca, he had been drenched in blood, but none of it from Irwan gained that day. Perhaps he should have gone to see a physician, that would have been sensible. But, such a man might be curious and intrusive. One too many questions and Tom could find matters against him and he would be out of a job. Just get on with it, Tom thought. Wash through anything which can be seen, pack the garments with dried leaves, and wait until it ceased. They were marching north tomorrow, or so said tonight's plan, shared with the 60th by Captain Frederickson, and he daren't risk questions. More carefully than the previous night Tom trod gingerly, feeling the ground before he trod to uncover any twigs or ossa growth which might crack or snap and might give away his presence to the undoubted watch. He could see the track that led to the brook picked out in the moonlight and followed it tentatively as he tried not move too quickly. In the water, he knew, the water would ease his muscles, considering the day, and both encounters with their commanding officer. It was good to strip off his undergarments and lower himself, in the cover of darkness, into the cool relief of the water. A good scrub of his clothes, slip on his clean, outer uniform. Pack the legs with the dry leaves that he had collected that morning surreptitiously from behind their tent to prevent any marks on his greens. Dry in the sun in the morning and all would be as it should be. Thomas Wright would be ready to march north with the regiment. Just about to step out of the water, dress and hurry back to the tent before he was missed, Tom started at the noise in the bushes near the bank. He stopped still in the water, still and quiet. Voices, in English, one English but with a French accent. They talked of ... the plan ... and of gold. He dashed out of the water now, scrambling with all his might to be clear and away, uniform on and unders in hands, leaves scattered everywhere. The tent was in sight. He just had to duck under the flapping canvas. A hand gripped Tom's shoulder and spun him around. Staring into his face was none other than Matthew Harris. Hustling him to a tree trunk beyond the tent, Harris asked, "What were you doing out of bed night? Again?" He glared fiercely at him, all friendliness from his saving him the day before long past. "Washing," Tom answered, truthfully. "At night?" he demanded suspiciously, wrenching Tom's clothes from his arms, holding his white unders up to the moonlight. Then, he turned slowly to Tom Wright. "What is this?" he demanded, thrusting the undergarments back towards Tom in their unclean state. I thought you were uninjured yesterday. I was, Tom managed. Harris groaned, pulling Tom up by his tunic. But then dropped him again as the back of his breeches brushed his other arm. He put his hand down, then glared at Tom. What is this? Here it was. His weakness. It was tell Harris and hope he understood, or be accused of being part of the plot that Major Sharp had begun to investigate. He should tell Harris about the exchange of money that he had heard. But, would he listen? Currently, Harris was only interested in him. It comes sometimes, and goes, Tom admitted, hoping that would be enough. Harris stared at him for a good few minutes before talking to him. Come with me, hissed Harris quietly. Cooper and Perkins are on a mission for Major Sharp, won't be back till tomorrow. I heard voices, pressed Tom, desperately. French, English ... talking about gold. But Harris ignored him, instead saying, let us have some privacy while you help me get to the bottom of this. But Tom struggled, and tried to break free. It did no good. Under breeches in one hand, Tom gripped in his other arm. Harris marched him in front of him until they had got to the third tent of the 95th Rifles. I must tell the Major what I heard. Instead Tom, trying to push his way past Matthew, but the rifleman was far stronger than he was. Eventually Tom sat down on the bedroll, looking at the floor. Harris lit the dim lantern, containing just a stub now of candle. Listen, he said, in a quieter tone. This ... blood ... it's not an injury, is it? Yes, replied Tom, looking back up. A long ago injury. An injury that comes back? Tom nodded. Matthew Harris smiled, and sat down next to Tom. You are not Tom Wright, are you? I am, retorted Tom, hotly. I took the king's shilling, Tom Wright took it, me. But you are not Tom Wright, repeated Harris. You can't be. It's impossible, he added, then, after a few moments' reflection, added, astonishment in his voice, could it be you don't know? He stood back up and handed the underbreeches back to Tom. How long has it been that you have tried to hide being a girl? He asked, bluntly. Tom opened his mouth to say something, then sagged, looking at the floor. I am not a girl, exclaimed Tom, getting to his feet. But Harris bent over him, indicating stains, though washed through. A trace still remained. My injury, said Tom. I was at Victoria when last it happened. He felt sick, telling Matt Harris all of this, and yet, he remembered Matthew as the learned stable boy his father had took Cashine to, and hired a tutor for. No, said Matthew Harris, pulling her down next to him. 4 weeks ago and we were at Victoria, he nodded. This is not an injury. Women have this, all women, when they are fertile. Able to bear a child, he added at his confusion. Did your mother not explain? He pressed the unders back into Tom's hands. Tom shook his head. Only that, when she died, for she was often ill, she told me I was not to whore, said Tom. Harris bent closer down to him. So, Thomas Wright joined the army, mused Harris, amusement in his eyes. You are right. Thomas Wright is not my birth name, Tom continued. And, you know me, Matthew Harris. I'm sorry, said Matt, coldly. I know you not. But nevertheless, recognition appeared on Harris's face, remembrance, recall of a time long past. You know me, or at least you did, Tom continued. My father educated you, like you were his son. We played together. But Harris had got up from beside Tom and strode across the tent. I have never met you before, decried Matthew Harris, hotly, but his face betrayed him, even in that dull candlelight. You did knew Roberta Haycock. You worked for her father. Her father's friend taught you Greek and Latin, and Homer, and Aristophanes. It was from her father you stole the 2 guineas and the roan horse. He cried, Matthew, he truly did. Tom got to his feet and he walked over to the rifleman. Tables turned. Now Tom had the advantage. But no, exclaimed Harris, shaking his head as he looked built to the tent opening and then back to Tom. Roberta? John Haycock. His face stiffened, and growled, "The traitor?" All of his assets were seized by the government. We would have been homeless had not a godmother of my own mother offered her work in Oxford. As it was, Tom looked down, feeling a flush creep across his face at his frankness. She died of consumption, in poverty when I was 11. I had to make my living, on my back or else a gun in my hand. The daughter of John Haycock, said Harris again, still trying to understand and shaking his head. Here, in the army? I am no traitor, Matthew, insisted Tom, shaking his head. Not me. When I took the king's shilling I became Thomas Wright. He is who I am. I have no father besides no mother. Tom sat back down, Matthew Harris striding over to the tent entrance, gazing out into the darkness. He scowled at his unders. Women get this, then, when they have children. He shook his head at the audacious idea. Perhaps this is what the papists called Eve's sin. It certainly hurt as if he was dying, like his comrades must have felt, fallen at their battles, dying with crushed limbs and torn flesh. But that he, like all women, were punished to dying pain each month, all for the want of a child. Perhaps if he told God, in his prayers tonight, that he would never desire a child, then this agony may cease. When I heard what he had done, Matthew said, interrupting Tom's thoughts, when I heard he betrayed the regiments raised in the colonies, I refused to believe it. Not Sir John, not the man I knew. Never. One more glance out of the tent, then Matthew strode over to her, his face distorted at the discomfort of retelling, then jerked his head away. But it was true. The evidence, the testimonies, from the men, from the officers, was overwhelming. Yes, nodded Tom, towards his knees. Yes. What Benedict Arnold did for us, John Haycock did for the independent states, he added, quietly. But why, was the question. Above everything else, Tom would dearly love to know why. Yes, I was a thief, I know it, Harris continued. It's not much different from what your father did. He sighed, still looking away from Tom. I am in the army because of him, you could say. I was given the choice of the army or hanging. I am sorry to hear it, said Tom. Thank you for helping me, Matt. I cannot begin to thank you. Harris turned slowly, then walked over and sat down by him. I do remember you, Matt added, after a thoughtful few minutes. You would scamper about, climb trees, jump off things. Your father had to get you down from a window ledge. I remember that. I remember laughing. He smiled at Tom, who smiled back. Whatever he did, your father turned you into a damned fine soldier, a damned fine rifleman, Cooper knows that well enough. And I would have it stay that way, said Tom, firmly. You want me to keep this a secret? It won't last for long, Tom. It has kept for 6 years. It will do again. I am good at hiding this blood, he added. Only, there were voices. You are clever to know it. Yes, nodded Harris, sitting down next to Tom. Your father's gift to me was the love of learning, to read, to understand, to learn. I have read so many books, medical included. My favorite is literature. And he taught me how to fight. How I loved Papa teaching me. Mother never chastened him, or me, nor said that it was unsuitable. I can fight as well as I do now because of him. Lucky Tom, mused Matt. But you won't now, surely? You will go home? Tom Wright laughed. What for? To be a pox-ridden prostitute? You could marry. Matthew, said Tom, carefully. You can be sure I will never marry. It is my honor to serve under the captain, but... hissed Matt, treading silently over to the tent flap. Then, he exhaled. Just the change of watch. He strode back over to him, kneeling in front of Tom, holding his shoulders and looking urgently into his face. You need to report what you have heard to the Major. Then, glancing down at her unders, added, do you still bleed? Tom hesitated for a moment, thinking about the packing for his underbreeches, in his breast pockets. It would be the work of a moment to make himself secure and began in haste. Yes, he said, unfastening his breeches. Harris looked away. Then, stay here. I'll keep watch. We go north tomorrow. Take my roll. Harris gestured vaguely over his shoulder towards the roll of blankets which, like all the private's bedding, was tucked away. But tomorrow, Tom, you must go to report what you heard to Major Sharp. That he has gone tonight based on his suspicions about the Redcoats attacking the Spanish is enough to show he is trying to outdo his enemy. Ducos? Asked Tom. Ducos, echoed Harris, edging to the tent flap again, huddled up in Cooper's blanket, kept a lookout.